Hello everyone, I am with the one and only Miss Anita Dixon. My name is Quest from Quest Presents, and we are at a historic site. I'm so excited to talk to her about where we are. Where are we, Miss Dixon?
We are at the Quindaro Ruins. Well, they call them the Quindaro, but this is the largest excavation of an underground railroad site in the United States. Wow. There used to be an entire city here. That Kansas was a free state, Missouri was a slave state. Wow. So the quickest way to get over generally was crossing the state line, but you had to cross the river to get over
yeah,
here.
That's why I'm so sweaty, y'all, because we went to the river. We got to see all of it.
You got to see this.
Talk about the history. What are they doing with it now? Let's talk about now, and then let's talk about then.
Well, back in the early 80s, the site was slated to become a landfill.
Wow.
And the community that lived in the Quindaro and around Wyandotte County was just outraged.
They didn't want it to happen.
Oh, well, no, because, you know, it was so seldom that people knew what the Quindaro actually was. Actually, the name Quindaro means bundle of sticks. And that virtually means, bundle of sticks means that separately, if you have a stick, you can snap it. But if you put those sticks together, they will become stronger. And you can, so the Quindaro was named for a bundle of sticks, so to speak. A lot of Native Americans, of course, and African Americans run away, enslaved. I never say slave. Right. You were enslaved. Enslaved is, slave was a condition, enslaved was a mentality.
What made this so impactful? What made coming from Missouri to coming to Kansas? Why was this passage so important?
Because there was a state line you could have crossed on the ground. Right. You know, all you had to do was just walk to it. Right. But because you could not cross over, there were so many deterrents. Okay, right. The paddle-rollers or the slave catchers in the 1852 Act.
So they were just waiting.
They would just wait for you, you know, if you were black.
How did they get, so they would come through?
They would come through.
Like, what were the challenges, I guess, of coming through?
Well, of course, having to navigate the underbrush. If you look around you, there was nothing but trees and water and stuff like that at one time. So one, you had to follow the North Star. Okay, which brought you in this direction, follow the drinking gourd, as they say, and you came in this direction. And then there was various ways that you could get in the city. So the city had a system of tunnels, okay, that were all over Wyandotte County, under the city. Wow. So you could enter in various places and walk through it. In about 1983, I'd met a young man and he took me on this big journey and he said, I got to show you something. And he started in the city and we walked through all these tunnels and crawled through places and ended up places. Guess where you were? He said, in the tunnels of the Underground Railroad. Wow. So if you made it over by water, okay, you could usually get deposited right into the city. Okay, but that was very, very difficult because, of course, there were people watching you from there.
Didn't know what was going to be.
Exactly. So there was the secrets of the quilts and the various names and things that you used, and the various abolitionists like John Brown, who the statue to.
John Brown.
Right.
So, okay, who was John Brown? Explain
John Brown. Probably one of the greatest names in abolitionist history. If you're looking for two names, you usually look for the Harriet Tubman and then for John Brown. John Brown saw a story just before the end of slavery, about 1836, of a gentleman by the name of Elijah P. Lovejoy in Illinois, who had a printing press. And he was working, he was a white guy, who worked to talk about slavery, and he would print about it and the atrocities of it, and they kept burning his printing press.
Wow, because they didn't want the story to get out.
Exactly, they didn't want that story to get out. So they kept burning his printing press until finally they burned his printing press for about the third time, caught him and killed him. Wow. But a black man who was his friend kept moving his body so they wouldn't desecrate it and set it up like they do slaves. So he's buried in Alton, Illinois, but John Brown heard the story as a young man, and it just enraged him. Wow. So he started coming through Kansas, and that's why they call this certain part of this history Bleeding Kansas, because he actually killed, he and his sons and various African Americans, and I won't say African American, black enslaved, you know, began to come through Kansas and take their take their freedom.
So you earlier was talking to me how Kansas kind of was created from Quindaro, this little passage. Explain that to them.
Well, the town of the Wyandotte County actually became, as they came out, they lost their charter. Because in around 1856, 1858, the war was beginning, the Civil War was beginning. So the men came out of the Quindaro, the black, to help fight the war. So as they came out from, the hiding place, so to speak, and joined the war, then they lost their charter as a city. But those who had stayed in the Quindaro owned property there, black folk, the church, the black church. You see churches here that are over 100 years old, and they were all a part of that Underground Railroad movement.
I just learned something. So churches was allowed to own. What about people having their own ownership?
People had their own ownership of land and various things out here, absolutely. So the whole town of Quindaro at one time, I'll never forget, it was like 1984, and a friend of mine a family member had died. He brought me into a Quindaro funeral. I didn't know what that meant, but people came from all around the country, who had moved from around the country, whose parents and grandparents and ancestors and stuff were either buried in the Quindaro or still had property here. And that was the longest procession I had ever seen in my life. These people returned and, held on to their property. So for this to have belonged to the church at that time and them have sold it for a landfill was like this big argument.
So the landfill was, some people can say maybe they can destroy history with the landfill. You think, why did the landfill, what was that? What was that, the importance of it, I guess?
Well, it was just another place to dump trash.
So they wanted to put trash over history.
It's another place to dump trash. So what? It was Underground Railroad, but because so much of the history had been lost.
Right.
They just figured they could come in, but there was people who didn't forget, who had never forgotten.
So you was telling us about it was a city.
It was a city.
See, I didn't know that. A city.
It was a city. It was a city.
Explain that city that was there.
City with hotels.
Wow.
And breweries.
All down here.
And homes. Wow. And businesses. And people who lived in this city and protected this city as an Underground Railroad place, a place of freedom.
What is something that you would tell the younger generation about the history here? What can we do to keep it up and to change our world?
To always remember that this was something that people died to have you keep. That the last 35 years of even just my life have been so we could fly that red, black, and green flag. Yeah. That understanding that the only way you're going to have economic parity, to have equality in this world, is to know who you are and who came before you, and the incredible sacrifices that were made, and to revere them to the point that you'll do like they did for them, and that's die. Wow. To make sure that they're always there for the future and change history. Wow. It's a incredible opportunity to put your stamp and your name on history and the future of where things are going to go.
If they wanted to find more information about this location, where would you tell them to go find it at?
That's wonderful. The National Park Service Department of the Interior can take you through a number of Underground Railroad sites. There is a specific site for the Quindaro Ruins. If you Google a friend by the name of Marvin Robinson, who has been one of my friends throughout the last 35 years, who can take you on an in-depth tour of the things that are going on here. The thing that I wanted to mention the most was the thing about the music. What are the origins of Black American music?
Stop right there. All right, we're going to stop. That's a good way to hold. We'll be back, you guys.